All right. So this is a closing event, and as I think many of you already know, we're going to have a student-led debate on whether, in the age of AI, universities will become obsolete. I know which side I'm rooting for, but the point of this, of course, is not to see just who wins, right? But who has the better argument. And to do that, we're going to, in a moment, show you a survey. We're going to ask you to vote. And once we know how you're voting, we're going to do another survey at the end, and we're going to find out if any or many of you have changed your minds, right? So it's going to be a little bit of a competition. It's like an Oxford-Cambridge-style debate. Now, in order to make all this happen, we're going to have the students lead this. This is a Columbia Student Debate Society. They're going to run the show for the most part. But once they're done, we're going to have a short time where I'm going to talk a bit about what I've seen and what I've heard, and I'm going to help to broaden that discussion. First with the students who are going to join me in front of you, and then we're going to open it up to a Q&A for everyone in the audience. But to kick things off, I'm going to hand things over to Claire Shipman. She obviously needs no introduction. But let me just say, in my capacity, I've just been really struck, by how Claire has been interested and more than just interested, active on issues related to AI from the outset. And as you can see, she's especially interested in understanding, knowing what students think about all this. So let me thank Claire for joining us and turn things over to her. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you all. And thank you, Matt. It was so wonderful when you told me about this and I could come join. I really want to thank everyone for being here today and for everyone who made the forum possible. I've been hearing from people all day about a lot of the really interesting sessions that have been going on. I know you're here today to explore a provocative question and one that stirs maybe some strong emotions for those of us who love the place. What does the future hold for this university and for all universities really as artificial intelligence reshapes our world? I know both sides are going to make compelling arguments. I too will not try to lean in, although I certainly have a point of view, I hope. But I think I could set the stakes. John Stuart Mill wrote, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that." And that's, of course, from his treatise on liberty, which has been part of Columbia's core curriculum for a long time. I think the core is one of the most cherished traditions of a Columbia education. For over a century, I think what has bonded all Columbia students, and I felt this way when I was here, and then well beyond, is that common experience of wrestling with those incredibly challenging texts. So one thing that I think a lot about is what does that tradition mean in a day and age when every one of the great books can be uploaded into a large language model, summarized in seconds, and then analyzed, interpreted, and even debated on our behalf? I think the wonderful thing about Columbia is we don't shy away from frontier ideas or new technologies. We certainly don't shy away from hard questions. I think through every moment of transformation and technological transition over the last 270 years, this has been a place where we look at emerging tools, we test them in one form or another, and then we put them to use for society. I think AI may be able to expand our access to great works and bodies of knowledge and accelerate, and we're already seeing this, life-saving research, even free up time to read and think and ponder more deeply. But I think in the piece that we saw Professor Connolly write recently for the New York Times, he offered a caution we should pay attention to, that in our rush to be leaders of AI, we shouldn't surrender what I think you called the ultimate high ground, which is human intelligence itself. So how do we do that at Columbia? Again, we have the rare privilege and responsibility of helping to shape this conversation. We're home to scholars who lead in artificial intelligence, ethics, public policy in the humanities and beyond. We're also stewards of a tradition that reminds us of something essential, that technology does not determine our values, we do. And at our best, we carry those values into the technologies that we build. Most critically, we're home to the most extraordinary students on the planet who always push our community to new heights, who take all Columbia has to offer, and who stand ready today to help us learn. So let's welcome the Columbia Debate Society. And we could call you up here and you could introduce yourselves. Thank you.
All right. I guess I'll start. Hello, my name is Albert. I am a sophomore in CC studying economics, political science. I'm very excited to be here, and I hope you have as much fun watching as we did preparing for this and then debating.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mukudzeiishe. I'm a third year in Columbia College studying political science and human rights. I'm just as excited, maybe a little bit more, than Albert to debate this.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm a junior at Barnard studying environmental science and political science. I'm also excited. I don't know how to scale my excitement. I guess we'll find out. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Is this on? Oh. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Edgar. I'm a sophomore at CC, and I'm studying financial economics. I'm also equally as excited as the rest of them to be here. So the way this will work is that myself and Emma are on the proposition side for this debate, and Muku and Albert are on the opposition side of this debate. Would you like to introduce the question?
Code up so that people can vote? There it is. Okay, yeah. Let's leave that up for a minute. If everyone could just vote on this question. And as you can see, the question is simply, in the age of AI, will universities become obsolete? All right, let's give everyone a moment to do that, and then you guys can kick it off. Okay, over to you.
Do I speak into this microphone or this big one? This one? Both work? Okay. Amazing. There have always been alternatives to attending university and claiming a degree. You could take courses online and you could self-study for certifications. But the danger of AI lies in its ability to simulate human talent, artistry, and creativity. It is the nail in the coffin which renders the university degree entirely obsolete. First point of framing. This is not a debate about whether it's normatively good for universities to become obsolete. It's a predictive question of whether AI is capable and likely to replace their core function. Second point is on the meaning of obsolescence. There are two ways a university can become obsolete. The first is structural, i.e. that universities no longer pull in enough revenue to maintain their function, so they reach an economic shutdown point and the majority cease to exist. The second is functionally obsolete, that universities can exist, but their function is no longer irreplaceable and you are much better off seeking alternatives. If we can prove that society moves towards either of these futures, then we win the debate. First argument, why AI is likely to replace research and education functions and lower your incentive to attend. Let's be clear, it costs money and time to attend university, oftentimes a lot. Students are only willing to spend because of the perceived value of receiving higher education. AI democratizes information to such a degree that it no longer makes sense to make this investment. What are the incentives of students? Twofold. First, they are largely to become employed. You hope that the knowledge and skills you acquire will transfer into an employable skill set. But second, it's about learning soft skills. That is to say, living on your own and all the personal skills that comes with, as well as things like networking, etc. Why is AI likely to replace the first function on education? 3 reasons. First, because AI democratizes information. It scrapes that information from datasets across the entire internet and delivers it to you in precisely the format you want. Crucially, it is constantly available to you, always self-improving, and can emulate any curriculum that you feed into it. But secondly, it has never been easier to fake your way through a college education with the rise of AI. Let's be very clear about this. AI can spit out problem set answers and essays with little to no effort required on the part of the user. This is crucial because the entire process of learning is about creating new neural pathways to familiarize yourself with what you are learning. If AI is able to replace this fundamental process, then you cannot differentiate between a student who is achieving highly and one who is not. But third, AI expedites research. What would usually be taken by a team of experts can be done by a single person for the reasons already stated above. This means that whether you attend university out of a genuine thirst for knowledge or just to get a degree, you're probably better off using AI rather than attending actual classes. This is important because if the decision-making factor is tens of thousands of dollars to access said classes, it doesn't make sense for you to make that investment. On soft skills, very quickly, we think that in the first place, university has always been a relatively inefficient place to learn these soft skills. It is incidental more than intentional. Why is it insufficient? First, because of things like professional skills, which are better learned in workplace settings that are more fine-tuned to the type of workplace you're in, not everyone wants to learn how to speak like a finance bro. But secondly, personal skills. University is actually a really poor simulation of what the real world is like. The fact that most of your needs are taken care of by facility workers and you get meal swipes, etc. Undergrads only pick up soft skills at universities because these are the first few years that you spend as an actual functioning adult, not because of anything inherent to universities. I am learning to cook, not because I'm at Columbia or some other university, but because it's my first time living away from home. Second argument then, AI creates a signaling effect that lowers the value of a degree. This is really important. Degrees are measured in prestige, and the more effort people invest into a degree, the more prestigious that degree is likely to be. The rise of AI homogenizes both the talent pool that employers scrape from, as well as the way in which students present themselves, which reduces the job market and makes it entirely unnecessary to go to university. What are the incentives of employers? Employers first compete with one another to seize talent as early as possible. This is a race to the bottom because most students are probably willing to take the first offer they receive so long as it gives them job security. Look at, for example, the competition between law firms, which previously occurred in your 2L year and is now being pushed into your 1L year. These are students with less than 6 weeks at university recruiting for their first full-time job. But secondly, employers want to differentiate within their talent pool. This is the whole concept of Columbia being a target school, for example, or some degrees being more valuable than others. How does AI change this? 2 ways. First, AI homogenizes the talent pool by increasing the baseline that students perform at. If you're able to project a high-performing image of yourself, and other students are able to do the same because you all have access to the same ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini tool, then this means that you appear functionally identical to the candidate next to you. But secondly, AI also reduces the threshold of technical skill needed in the first place. As any first-year analyst or intern will tell you, a lot of entry-level positions are fundamentally grunt work which don't require an enormous amount of skill to perform well in. What this then means is that both from the position of the candidate and the position of the employer, the talent pool is largely homogeneous. A university degree means so much less if you're able to fake your way through it, and the skill you need isn't that high anyway. For those reasons, I am proud to stand on the proposition side of this debate. We're now going to enter a cross-examination portion of the debate. I will stand and I'll receive 90 seconds of questioning from Muku, who is the next person to speak.
Wonderful speech, Edgar. It's always a pleasure to debate with you. My first question is, your speech seems to suggest that AI has revolutionary potential, and this is difficult to contest. At this point, I'm wondering, what can AI not do?
I think this is also a difficult thing to say. What differentiates AI from previous technological steps like the printing press, which I strongly predict you're going to bring up in your speech, is that AI is ever evolving and it's building on itself. I'm sure all of us have heard about the amount of investment being poured into AI every single day. The skills that AI was able to do 2 years ago is very different to how it is now. I'm not sure I can answer that, but I can say that its flaws are always being patched up on a day-to-day level.
Perfect. If that's the case, it seems to be that as we develop, there will be certain things that AI will not always be capable of delivering on. The best example is debating. I don't imagine that you were reliant at any point on ChatGPT or Cloud AI to deliver your debate speech. If that's the case, that suggests that there is something fundamentally human that was needed to be able to deliver on this speech that AI could not assist you with. Do you think this is a reasonable read of your experience of preparing for this debate?
I don't think so. The fact that I did not rely on AI to use this speech does not suggest that I could not have used AI to, write this speech. And I think that within this field of debate specifically, we're already seeing AI being increasingly skillful. I don't want to name any names, but one of my former coaches famously debated an AI on a global stage, and it was like very, very close. So that's just to say that if AI is able to simulate other forms of essay writing and argumentation, it can definitely do so in this field as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Edgar. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake. We've been here before. When the printing press was invented, university administrators in the 15th century feared that the mass availability of literature and the surge in literacy it would produce would render them and their contemporaries obsolete. When the internet emerged at the turn of the millennium, thousands of schools and university leaders worried that it would supplant the once sacrosanct role of educators in our society. Our stance as the opposition is simple. Education, and in particular higher education, is an ever-changing, ever-shifting endeavor. The academy has weathered revolution after revolution and endured. We believe the university will endure this one as well. We will make two arguments. First, on why university education goes beyond accreditation, and secondly, on why in a world of artificial intelligence, the value of a university education will go up. First, we go to university for reasons beyond accreditation, and these other non-accreditation expectations will persist even after artificial intelligence renders education fundamentally different. The starting point of this argument is that if there is anything universities have learned how to do, at the very least in the last decade, it is to evolve. When COVID-19 first emerged, universities were worried that it would be impossible to restart what it meant to be an institution of higher education. The university found ways to evolve. The university evolves and the academy evolves because it has no choice but to. That is, for all the reasons that the proposition has already given you that cast doubt on the ability of the university to deliver on its expectations, each of those reasons are pressure on university administrators to shift, evolve, and to reimagine what it means to learn and study in the 21st century. Why is it that other priorities other than accreditation will persist even after AI changes education? First, because people have always been able to get knowledge outside of universities. Like Edgar points out, there is a range of resources that exist that make it such that if you really want to learn something, you can. I am a political science major, but I'm currently learning how to code. Not because my university education in political science is obsolete, but because I'm able to leverage the range of other resources outside of my school's four walls to be able to build up on skills that my university is not teaching me at this point. But second, because these are the kinds of things that people reference when they discuss the things they learned during their time in university. For a majority of individuals, if you sit them down and ask them what they learned in school, they will not tell you that they learned Calculus 3, even though they may have. They will not tell you that they learned data analysis, even though they may have. They will leverage and point to other experiences, the friends they made, the connections they learned how to form, the entrepreneurial partnerships that they established with their classmates. Universities remain the best place to learn these skills, contrary to what you hear from the proposition. Firstly, because universities are a safe space for experimentation and exploration. That is, that the reason why Edgar feels comfortable learning how to cook, even though he has the opportunity to go to a dining hall, is because he knows that the university will always be a safe space that encourages him to experiment, that will not shame him when he is unsuccessful in his cooking. But second, universities are extraordinarily diverse spaces. The panel sitting in front of you right now is evidence of this fact, that independent of what we come to university to learn, the most important thing that we take away is the ability to navigate diverse environments, to encounter difference and be able to navigate it. Artificial intelligence will never take this away from us. Our second argument is that the value of a degree will go up in the face of the rise of artificial intelligence. Right now, and even prior to the emergence of AI, the job market was becoming increasingly competitive. Ask any computer science major, and they will tell you that the fact, for example, of automation at lower level industries, the fact of the sheer number of people who are getting university educated and going into the job market are all evidence of the fact that getting a job is harder than ever before. What universities do is they make it much easier for you to get a job because of their accreditation function. This manifests in three ways. The first is signaling. An employer who knows that you went to Columbia knows that you had to navigate
navigate the difficulty of a 30,000 person student body and the diversity that it induces. They know that you had to navigate the difficulty of the core. And perhaps they'll doubt that you did all the readings, but they'll certainly believe that you know how to use artificial intelligence to be able to find out what it is, in fact, that Homer was talking about in the Iliad. But secondly, university education demonstrates your knowledge of how to use AI. That is, that the range of opportunities that instructors are adopting right now that make it such that we are constantly learning the various things AI can teach us is evidence of the fact that maybe AI will change things, but the people who will best be able to conquer the 21st century are those who will come out of university having learned what AI can do to change the world for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Muku, for that very fine speech. As always, a pleasure to hear you speak. My first question is, you say that universities have always found ways to evolve when things like the printing press or the internet were invented. My question is, do you think that there's nothing that differentiates the rise of AI to something like books being more available to me on JSTOR, for example?
Almost certainly there are substantial differences between the invention of the printing press and the emergence of AI. But what both of them have in common is that, for lack of a better word, they have turned up the heat on universities. The university has no choice but to adapt and to find new ways to remain relevant. Our argument is that we trust that the university will be successful in this process of adaptation.
Thank you. My second question is on the value of a degree. There seems to be a clear divergence wherein I think that if the rise of AI is so ubiquitous and employers know this, the value of a degree will go down. What makes you think that employers will not believe that students are simply using AI to acquire their degree and then get out of university as soon as they can?
So the first thing is that at face value, it's difficult to imagine anyone could get through 4 years of university using AI. I would be worried if anyone were able to, but more seriously, I would have a lot of respect for anyone who's able to get through not only the core, but also their major using exclusively AI. If anything, this becomes a measure of your intelligence, the fact that you're able to circumvent a range of things that exist to challenge you by using AI. But simply put, it is unlikely that anyone will use AI in these defining ways that you point to.
All right, thank you. I think that's
Thanks,
the
Edgar.
time we have.
All right. Okay. My name's Emma. I'll be the second speaker for the proposition side. Again, I'll be speaking for 5 minutes. Muku starts his speech by telling you we have been here before, but the reason that we are in this room having this debate is precisely because we have not. AI is unprecedented in a way that makes universities' reactions to it completely unique and will incur the harms that we're talking about. I think the reason that Edgar tells you this, that Muku really doesn't engage with, is that AI has exponential growth, i.e. it evolves on its own. It does not require human input to do more and take itself farther. That's what makes it able to do the things like research particularly well, to scrape the internet for information particularly well. But it also means that we cannot predict its capability. We cannot predict where it will go and what it will do. So we think its power to change education is far beyond what Muku estimates that it is. I also believe that AI will continually evolve faster than universities, i.e. universities will not be able to do the evolution and response that they have for other tools. This is for a couple reasons. First, we think AI and AI companies are exclusively motivated by profit, and this makes them able to move faster than universities. Universities have other considerations, like the well-being of their students, the faculty that they employ, the government regulations that allow them to keep whatever nonprofit status they have. AI simply does not. In fact, our government, as it stands, is currently in the pocket of big AI developers. They are too afraid of the speculative AI bubble popping to do any sort of regulations that hamstring the industry from continual growth. So we think that it's on a rocket ship path to continual development that is always going to outpace universities. So don't let them get away with just saying, universities will respond. On the other functions of universities and why we think they will be replaced, this is likely because of what Edgar tells you in his first speech, that they are just not that good at doing these functions in the first place. I think one, Muku tells you that they're a safe space for exploration, but I think these explorative purposes are better done outside of universities for a couple reasons. First, universities are fundamentally locked behind a paywall. Maybe, in their best case, it is great to learn how to live with a roommate, how to go to parties, how to get really drunk at AK Psi, right? You can do all of those things, but should those things only be accessible for those who can pay $60,000+ a year, or the very few who get select scholarships? They say that this stage is diverse, but I don't think it actually is. I am very financially privileged. Most of us are, or we got lucky enough to be in this room. There are plenty of people who could benefit from that aren't here. We think it's a better world when these types of learning experiences are moved outside of the university circle. But also on this, I think that universities just aren't very good at these things because they're not a reflection of the real world. On one hand, they're too busy. I am constantly worrying about my GPA and the essay I have to write tomorrow, far too busy to learn how to be good at washing a dish. If you want evidence of this, just ask my freshman year roommate. She really never picked up on that skill. And I also just think that it's much too coddled in university, for lack of a better word. You aren't actually exposed to the real world. If we have people moving out of this, that's where they're going to learn skills like, I don't know, paying their taxes, being financially responsible. Finally, on the value of a degree, Muku says that employers will prefer people who went to Columbia because they know that they'll be really good at using AI. I think this does nothing for the value of degree. It's actually not that hard to learn how to put a prompt into Claude, and quite frankly, the people that tell you this is a hard skill are just AI developers trying to sell you some course on making this seem more valuable. So I think this means little to employers, and secondly, I think it's just done better in-house. Employers always have incentives to train people specifically for their jobs, i.e., if I'm a tech company, I'm going to hire people, then train them how to use AI for tech specifically, rather than send them to a generalized college degree where they maybe learn how to generate an image that looks like a certain thing, or write a humanities essay, but this is irrelevant for my job. So I think it's always going to move in-house because it's just more efficient. Employers are profit motivated. Secondly, under this, he says, it's still hard to get through a degree with AI, and this says something about you. I just frankly think this is not true. First of all, on the above point about evolving, universities are always going to be slower. AI is going to develop capacities to essay write faster than professors can figure out how to move all of their exams to a handwritten blue book. Secondly, even if this is true, I think it substantially restricts what a university education looks like. Maybe there is some world in which you can make all tests analog and you can only give students paper materials and you'll never have them write a long-form essay, type it again. I think that's a very sad world. I'm a humanities student. I write a lot of long-form essays. I don't use AI, and I think it's beautiful to be able to write and produce a long-form essay. If we can only ever write in blue book exams again, that substantially restricts what a university education looks like and makes it less valuable in the eyes of employers. Thank you.
I thank you for an excellent speech. I guess the first question I have is this. In your case, you make two claims.
Firstly, you tell me that AI is going to replace the educational value of universities. Secondly, you tell me under this that AI is, you tell me that people are going to misuse AI, but you also tell me that AI is going to fundamentally be able to provide for education. So which one is it?
I don't think this, am I audible? I don't think those two things are incompatible. I think AI can be very good at what it does while also being a bad force in the world.
The second question is this. Most of your claims are path dependent on proving that somehow, some way, the value of a college degree itself will be undermined. Given that you're saying that the value of a college degree will be undermined, how else are you claiming that employers are going to differentiate between people they are pulling from the job pool?
Employers are going to do that in the way that they always have, which is look at candidates, screen them through resume screenings, through interviews. Maybe they add some sort of standardized testing, but we think any process that they may have to add is still going to be more efficient than waiting for students to go through a 4-year degree. What Edgar tells you is that employers want to snap up talent as quickly as possible, so why would they wait around for a college education to occur when it's really teaching them, at best, how to input a prompt into Claude?
Okay. And then my final question is this. Is it your claim that the value of a university primarily is to enter the job market, or are you claiming that the value of a university also includes other things like education and soft skills?
Insofar as education and soft skills are better done elsewhere, yes.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to respond to their arguments on our case, reinforcing our arguments, and then I'm going to address their case. Let's begin in 3, 2, 1. Muku has told you a few things, that we've been here before, that education is always changing, and that the value of a university lies beyond its accreditation. What does Emma tell you? She tells you that AI is unprecedented and forces a unique reaction from universities, that it is impossible to adjust, that the growth is exponential, that regulation is impossible. I think, largely speaking, this is fear-mongering. Obviously, it is the case. Maybe she's right. Maybe AI will be very difficult to regulate. But I think there are just simple things that universities can do that will be able to bite back the worst of its harms. Firstly, I think it just is the case that you can have in-person exams. You can lower the weighting of take-home assignments and homework and just proctor students that write with a pencil. You can't chat GPT from Ticonderoga. The second thing is just, even if she's right, that it undermines your ability to do take-home assignments. It undermines your ability to write long-form essays, that you could also just have that occur in a classroom setting. I actually don't think it's true that universities won't be able to adjust at all. But finally, let's say she's right. Let's say universities won't be able to adjust to AI at all, that they won't be able to do so in a way that's good. I think this argument is relatively uncomparative. And what I mean by that is that it does not actually address the differentiation that still needs to occur by employers. And I will expand on this argument later. Next, let's talk about why universities will always remain a unique and safe space for experimentation and why they are important. A lot of their arguments are that experimentation is better done outside, and a lot of this is premised on the idea that you should seek to replicate what you're doing in the job market as soon as possible, and that universities aren't good at this because they don't replicate what's done in the job market. I think these arguments are also unrealistic. The point of university isn't to be a job simulator. The point of university is to develop the skills that allows you to engage as a more informed, better educated citizen down the line. These are benefits that accrue far beyond just what allows you to work in a job well. But secondarily, it's just that the incentives that people have for going to university in the first place don't really change due to AI. Much of their arguments about like a lack of privilege, about why university is a poor simulation for what people actually need to do, aren't really changing with AI. Their arguments had to be about why AI is uniquely going to be the reason why people suddenly stop deciding to go to university, which they don't actually prove to you. But finally, I'll say this, is that a university will always remain a unique and safe space for people to experiment because it is uniquely diverse. Maybe it's not the most diverse, but it is definitely more diverse than working at your local job that you had to work at to be able to make and pay rent. It is easier to form community and form relationships with your classmates than with your coworkers. It is far more difficult to do that and engage in that type of interaction on their side. Finally, we tell you that the value of a degree is going to increase when AI replaces more things, that jobs will always need a way to differentiate between their candidates. I think there are a few problems with their responses to this. The first is they say that it's just not that hard to prompt, that it's going to be easy to misuse AI, that the value of a college degree in a vacuum will go down. The problem is that this doesn't change the value of a college degree in relation to people that did not go to college. That is to say, if they are correct that everyone is universally going to be adopting AI, the actual question that employers then have to ask is, among these people that are all adopting AI, which among them are the most qualified to do so? And they haven't actually explained why it is the case that jobs are going to be able to do this well, why they're going to be able to differentiate better than universities have done, given the mass amounts of precedent that universities have done in terms of like having accreditation and having this type of brand name recognition. We actually don't think that goes away on their side. So even at their best, we think this argument is insufficient because they had to prove why it is the case that what replaces universities is necessarily going to be similarly important in terms of accreditation. Let's talk about their case. They have said a few things. They say that AI is fundamentally different, that it attempts to simulate human talent and is good at this. I'm going to beat this argument at its best later down. They have said there are two standards for obsolescence. The first is structural, where there's not enough revenue, and the second is functional. We're going to win this under both metrics. The first point is about research and education. There are three problems. The first is that education is uniquely done at a university. Even if it's true that people have the ability to go learn from an AI, that the way in which they're learning from that AI is simply worse because they don't have the same connections with their classmates, with their professors, that don't lead to those same types of research opportunities and job jobs that occur later, which also reinforces our arguments about why a university, even at its most cynical, is still necessary for you to get a job. The second problem with this argument is that at a university, you have a community of like-minded people who are able to work together. That proximity of connection is not replicable in their world under AI. And the third and final problem with this argument is that it's, again, uncomparative. That is to say, if they're right that everybody is using AI and everybody is doing it poorly and learning absolutely nothing, they haven't explained why it is the case that alternatively, people are going to still be able to differentiate between the types of people they want to hire, and that a university will still be necessary for that. On the idea of professional skills and soft skills, I want to say that Muku has already beaten this argument when he's told you that it's about diversity, that it's about community, and those things are irreplaceable by AI, that the connection between people will always remain the same. And on their final argument about signaling, I think our arguments have already beaten this. Very proud to oppose.
Fantastic speech, Albert. I am beginning to realize I was, in fact, very excited for this debate. I was right to be so. All right.
Thank you.
My first question for you, you say that you will universities will lower the weight of take-home assignments in their grade book. But the deepest engagement with my education so far has occurred when I've spent hours and weeks poring over texts, dedicating them to a research paper around some central, interesting topic. How do you maintain that sort of deep engagement with simply in-class discussion or timed essays?
I think this is a good question. The fundamental issue I had with a lot of your arguments is that it doesn't address the types of people willing to go to universities in the world that you are describing. Our claim is that the types of people who are still willing to pay that like $60,000 a year price tag are still willing to get these same things out of universities. We don't think the type of person in your world who's just willing to ChatGPT their way through college will probably just go to college in the first place. So we think that universities will still have an essential educational role to fulfill.
I'm sure Edgar will respond to that. I have a second question. You say that the point of university is not to be a job simulator, it's to learn how to engage with the real world. The vast majority of people in the real world, in fact, billions of them, don't attend college. It's abnormal to be here. Are all of these people underdeveloped, unsocialized, and incapable of living in the real world?
No. It's about the places that universities are and the societies that they're constructed for. My claim is not that these people are underdeveloped. My claim is that in order to engage in the type of society that we currently live in, that currently has universities, that the role of university education will remain paramount.
All right, thank you.
I'm now going to present a 3-minute speech, largely summarizing the debate and giving, how should I put this, like clashing the debate, explaining what both sides said, and explaining why I think we should win. Okay. Oh, sorry, can we restart the timer? That wasn't me speaking. It's okay, I'll just use my phone timer. Albert makes a crucial concession that some people, even if not all, will ChatGPT their way to a degree. And let's be realistic about what this looks like, because I'm willing to say that this does not mean every single assignment is 0% their own work. But it does mean that the majority of the thinking and the human expression that you otherwise would have to do, whether that be explaining your own opinion on what Descartes meant, or explaining how you got to that final step in that P set, is able to be replaced or enormously supplemented by ChatGPT. This is different to what JSTOR offers you. With JSTOR, I am able to pull documents off the internet, but I still have to process them in my own human brain in order to produce work that the professor will then assess. If I am reliant on AI, and let's be clear, more students use AI than you think, then the way in which I'm able to do this replaces my thinking. Whether I did this work, or Albert did this work, or Muku did this work, the end result would not belong to any of us, and intellect, like even on an IP level, it would not belong to us. But the concession is this. The types of people that would ChatGPT their way to a degree are unlikely to attend university in the first place. This is precisely what me and Emma have been getting at, that a lot of students come to university because of prestige or the perceived value that getting a degree will bring to them, i.e., they think that they want to get a job and university is the way to get that job. If it is now believed that you don't even need a degree in the first place to acquire that skill or to acquire that prestige, then they are unlikely to enroll. It means that they are not dropping upwards of $200,000 on the degree, and it does mean that they're able to enter the job market first. So that is a crucial concession. Let's talk about employers and the prestige that a degree signals. 20 or 30 years ago, having an MBA was considered a necessary stepping stone to reach any significant career milestone in certain financial service sectors. Today, college students as young as 19 or 20 are interviewing for what are effectively full-time positions at top investment boutiques. In fact, the advice I've received is to not do an MBA, because I can pick up these same technical skills on the side or once I'm on the job. Now, does this mean that nobody ever does an MBA? No, but it's hard to argue that the degree isn't on its way to becoming obsolete. The reason for this is what I told you in my first speech. Employers are engaged in a rat race. They want to recruit first, and as soon as they're able to differentiate the top talent from the middling talent. If AI homogenizes the talent pool anyways, then the incentive of employers is now to snap up students as early as they can, because any student can leverage AI to do the grunt work in your first speech. What you are then differentiating between is personality, is fit, is who was able to get that first coffee chat with you. Next on life skills, and I just think that just as our job in this debate was to prove the uniqueness of ChatGPT or AI tools, I think the burden was on the opposition to prove that university had to be a unique environment to experiment. Muku says that it's a safe space, but I'd wager the majority of workplaces are not going to crucify you if you don't know how to cook an omelet. Most places are able to teach you basic life skills, and these are things you're able to pick up anyways. Universities may have some value, but for most students who don't want to spend a couple $100,000 every single year to attend a university, it means that the value they hold is far, far less. It means they are largely and functionally obsolete.
My opponents are a team of humanities majors, and in some ways I think this drastically constrains their view of AI in education. Because maybe they're right, maybe AI can help you write a couple of paragraphs of your research paper. But they still haven't answered the big question. AI cannot help you answer questions when you're standing in front of an audience and Edgar is breathing over your shoulder. AI cannot help you determine what to prompt the AI with. Unfortunately, maybe they're correct that AI is able to collect information and spit out a couple of outputs, but there is something more fundamental to the process of learning and education, and that thing is what universities will stand on in the face of AI. The first thing I want to observe is that all of the arguments they make about how powerful AI is are necessarily self-constrained. Emma is correct that it is very easy to plug a prompt into Claude or ChatGPT. The issue is, all of the seemingly divine powers that they attribute to AI will obviously not be done by archaic forms of AI like Claude and ChatGPT. What this means is, as AI gets more powerful, it will get more complex, and the people who will best be able to navigate that complexity are those with a university education. Those who took a class in AI in the computer science department, those who took a class in data scrapping in the statistics department, and so on. They say that employers would rather do this in-house. But first, if they could, they would, and fair, some are. But crucially, most don't because they don't want to be the ones to bear the cost of training. The fact that people are willing to pay $100,000 every year to go to university is a good thing for employers because it means they're able to save on the cost of training that is then consumed by students when they go to university. Finally, let's accept the best case of the opposition. Maybe AI is spectacularly powerful and there's nothing we can do about it. Our argument was very simple, that the university will adapt because it must adapt. They say artificial intelligence grows too fast to be able to regulate. But first, I'm not really sure who they think is responsible for driving the growth of AI. Obviously, it's researchers, and where do these researchers come from? Hint, hint, the university. But second, the academy is the most adaptable institution on earth. Let me be clear. If they are correct that not even the communion of the brightest minds in the world that the university represents can stop the tidal wave of AI, then I think we have far, far bigger problems to worry about. We choose to have faith in the university, not because we are blind to the reality, but because we recognize that despite the challenges, the university as an institution is built on responding to challenges and adapting and remaining relevant in an ever-changing world. For these reasons and many, many more, we're very proud to stand on the side of the university.
That was tremendous. Thank you so much. So now's the time. If you could all, I know you voted 45 minutes ago, but we're asking you to do it again because we want to see, whether to what extent people might have changed their minds based on what you just heard. Okay. All right. So I'm going to make some remarks, and then at the end, Alexis is going to tell us what the outcome was in terms of the votes before and after. Is that all right? No. Okay. Well. Okay. Not a lot of change. At the outset, we had 8% who agreed, that AI would make universities obsolete. And it went all the way up to 10%. But, all right. Now you can, depending on how you can count that as a victory, right? But it was not an enormous shift. But not for lack of trying, right? Because I think both sides, made excellent arguments. I just want to offer a few remarks for a few minutes, some of the things that stood out for me. And also draw from some of what I've been learning, not just from our panelists tonight, but some of the research that we've been doing among Columbia undergraduates to understand how they're thinking about AI, how they're using it. But let me first off just note how when we heard from our panelists, what we heard about, for the most part, was whether and how universities and the way that they prepare students for the workforce, whether that role is going to become obsolete. We didn't hear a lot until almost the end when Muku pointed out, the people building AI systems are researchers who are trained in universities. And in fact, the foundational research for LLMs was work that was done at universities, and it was publicly funded for the most part. So I don't think we should forget that. After all, universities aren't here only to prepare students for their future employment. We're also here to create knowledge, to make discoveries. And a lot of what we want to know is what we don't know, right? And as we all know, when you ask AI about this or that or anything else you could think of, you almost always get some kind of answer. Whether it's true or not is sometimes hard to say. What you typically don't hear is that actually no one knows the answer to that question yet. So I think academics have an increasingly important role in telling everyone else what it is that we still don't know, what we need to find out. So they're there, at the frontiers of knowledge, trying to point the way. Now, for sure, that mission, that essential mission, I think is increasingly at risk, right? Because of the ways in which we've seen so many people doubting, the value of what universities do in the way of research. And one reason, I think, is because this other role that I'd like to point out, the way in which universities also try to prepare young people to be citizens, right? To help them prepare to fulfill their role as citizens, to be active and informed, that role also is at risk, right? Because we're told that we indoctrinate our students, right? We fill them up with spurious ideas. We train them to think as automatons, right? Or to stop thinking and only to repeat what we tell them. And of course, that's just insulting. It's insulting, first of all, to teachers, and it's even more insulting to our students to think that we can indoctrinate them in that way. So that idea, and it's an ideal, but I think it's also a reality. Our students in the course of their time at university, I think they are, learning to become, more active, more engaged, and more effective as citizens. That role too is at risk. But I think it'd be interesting when we talk amongst ourselves. We're going to have a panel discussion in a moment before we take questions from the audience, talk a bit more about all the other things universities are here for and why it hasn't been kind of more visible in the discussion we've had to this point. Now, there's another aspect to this. It's when Emma talked about how it's a sad world, right? When the way that universities adapt to AI is increasingly having students do their work in class, having less and less at-home writing. It is a sad world. I've heard from students often saying that maybe it's only students like Emma, but she's not the only one, who thought that at university they were going to be challenged to write research papers, right? To really get deep, into particular topics, to create knowledge themselves, right? To make discoveries on their own. And it is true, one of the ways we're adapting is to have students doing less work at home. So I'm worried about that because I think it's true in the exchange between Emma and Albert, when one of the questions, was about AI, like, is it working or isn't it? Does it work or does it not? So of course, like AI can be effective in what we prompt it to do, but at the same time, it may be doing things to us, right, that make it more difficult for us to develop and learn and even to use AI effectively. So I think we need to take seriously this question as to whether and how the ways in which AI is now being used, the way students are adapting, is making them less adapted, right? Less able to grow when they leave university. Now, finally, Muku made a strong case, I thought, for how it is that universities have always evolved. And this is something that's not always, visible to students because, after all, most students are in university at most for 4 years. Even if you get a graduate degree, it's only a few years longer. And in that short span of time, and especially because we're constantly, trying to give you the idea these universities have been around, for centuries and will continue forever, it may give you the impression that it's always been like this. We're constantly celebrating our traditions, and in some ways kind of mystifying the reality, which is that, even in my time at Columbia, and I was a student way back when, during the Cold War, this institution has changed enormously. Even the core curriculum, I'm teaching contemporary civilization. As a historian, I wanted to understand how has this course changed over the years. It's been around more than 100 years. And if you look back at the way this course was taught, if you go all the way back to 1919, even in 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s, it has been changing, like year after year, decade after decade. The course that students now take when they take contemporary civilization is fundamentally different, entirely different than what students were taking 100 years ago. And that's just one course. And it's supposedly the same course, and it's the core course of the core curriculum. So universities have changed tremendously. And as Muku pointed out, one of the ways in which we evaluate whether people are intelligent or not, whether they're capable or not, is if they can think on their feet, right? Can they speak, off the cuff, sometimes on tight deadlines, when somebody's looking over their shoulder? That kind of knowledge goes all the way back. The way we value it and the way we try to test it, it goes back to the time of Plato. Like, it's often pointed out, that one of the more famous dialogues is one in which Socrates talks about the way that what we would call book learning, is coming to, become so dominant, in the way that people considered one another educated, was that it was beginning to undermine, 2,500 years ago, the kind of knowledge that he thought was only evident and could only be cultivated when people speak with one another, when they engage one-on-one. And so, what happens, right? Now, of course, people gain book learning, but we still, the very pinnacle of an academic, graduate education is when we test them and we decide whether they get to be doctors, right? Doctors of philosophy. And how do we do that? Through an oral exam. And so what's interesting about that for me is we're using this 2,500-year-old technique, to offer the ultimate test as to whether somebody is capable of creating knowledge and making discoveries, as if they can think on their feet and defend those ideas. So it's an example for me of how, some of the things about universities that we most love are things that are thousands of years old. And yet in this time, so many other things have changed. And so I agree, with the idea that, universities have evolved. Now, whether they will continue evolving, I mean, that would be using the future as evidence, right? And that's one thing I've noticed a few times tonight is how it is that we are talking in many cases about the things to come. That in itself, I will tell you as an historian, is not in itself evidence, right? So I would just like to, as we begin this panel discussion, to be mindful of how it is that some of the evidence that we're offering are, in fact, predictions as to things that may or may not happen. Okay, so let me begin our panel discussion, and I'll just invite my fellow panelists to respond as they like, and we'll do this for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So maybe I could just start over on the right. So Edgar, would you like to begin? And then we'll go with Emma and Muku and Albert. Over to you, Edgar. Just thoughts. Thoughts. Well, for instance, just to take the first one, were we talking too much about credentialing for the job market? Did we at any point lose sight of the other things that universities are meant to do?
Graduates to run a debate on the role of a university, I think all of us are very deeply influenced by what we perceive the job of the university to be. All of us are here for a particular reason. And the four of us are here for probably more homogenous reasons than the people in this room, perhaps. And I think you can definitely hear that in the emphasis that we had on employability, like how are you able to transfer yourself over into the job market. But you're absolutely right that things like research, which we are probably a little bit less inclined towards, are also vital parts of the university. And that's because universities are there's so many avenues within a university, it's so multifaceted. And there really isn't one singular function that AI can replace and say, there, our job is done, we've now taken over Columbia successfully. You have to really balance it out. And Muku, in a way, is absolutely right when he says that if one function of the university is supplanted, maybe the university just shifts away from it and develops a new way to test students or to, in any way, make human knowledge better and brighter.
Okay. Would anyone else like to comment to this about the core function of the university?
I think I probably represent a minority of Columbia students who are very big on the sort of the hard stuff of universities. That we're not here to go to class and to do assignments and P-sets, but we're here for everything else, for the people that we learn from, the connections that we form, and so on. I was not lying when I said in my speech that if you asked me 10 years from now, what did I learn from Columbia? I probably won't tell you about what I studied in my political science classes. What I will tell you about is this debate. I will tell you about the fact that I went to an institution whose leadership saw it fit to think about its adaptation going into the next century and chose to ask students, what do they think? What should the university be doing? I will reference the incredible friendships I've formed with Albert, Emma, and Edgar, because that's really what we are here to do in university. So I will always insist that the biggest learnings that a university can offer its students, and really not just a university, but even a high school, education really is less about the book stuff and more about the hard stuff. And the hard stuff is not something AI is taking away anytime soon.
I couldn't help but notice that, Muku, when you talked about how it is that, in effect, employers when they hire people who have will have the university credentials, one thing they may be hiring them, one reason they're hiring them is because they've shown that they know how to use AI, for instance, to find out what did Homer have to say in the Iliad, right? But that speaks to the second concern. If students are using AI, to understand what Homer said in the Iliad, isn't that kind of subverting what it is that many of us think we're doing when we assign these texts? Because after all, the idea with the core curriculum is that it's meant to have students grappling with some of the most difficult questions where there is no one right answer, right? Like in the case of the Iliad, it's many things, right? But it's about pride, it's about glory, it's about war, right? And if you're just asking AI, what did Homer say in the Iliad? Are you grappling with any of those things?
I think this is one of the big problems that instructors have to try to navigate going into the age of AI. I was, and I feel old saying this, but when I took CC, when I took LitHum, ChatGPT didn't exist. I actually did not have the chance to ask ChatGPT, what is Homer about? And it's incredible that that was just 2 years ago, yet it feels like a century ago. It feels like a different era in time. But something that all my instructors, from CC to LitHum to all the other classes that I've taken, have always emphasized is that meaning from a text is in part derived from that struggle that I think Emma was talking about, of sitting with the text in Butler, of really wrestling with the text and trying to understand what is it that the author is trying to communicate. And so perhaps some students will turn to ChatGPT to tell them what Homer was saying, but I think those who will sit with the text and wrestle with it will find new layers of meaning that nobody else would ever have been able to reach. And perhaps that might not translate into better employment prospects for them, but I definitely think it will translate into a more a fuller and richer life defined by an ability to see beyond what is in front of you, to identify new forms of meaning that one might not be able to identify just at the surface.
What do you think, Emma?
I think Muku is getting at what I personally believe to be the most important function of university, which is teaching us how to think. Just as my priors are, one, if you ask me in a vacuum, I would agree with their side of the debate, and two, I am passionately anti-AI. I have never used it for an assignment, and I don't intend on doing so. So that may inform what I'm about to say. I think that teaching us how to think, how to use our brains to understand problems and create some sort of output, I think that's common across all degrees, is never going to be able to be replaced by AI, because no offense, Muku, I don't think it's that hard to put in a prompt. I really don't. I mean, there's some skill to it, but it's not the same. So I don't think it will be able to, but I do think that people may stop doing it, whether or not it can be replaced, right? It's about the student level incentives, and I think that's why we talked so much about employment, is not because we think that is the most important thing, right? Because it's not, I think, intuitively, but because whether or not students can get to the most important thing is like below in terms of like the order of logic. Like whether or not they want to do it is a priori to whether they can. So that's, I think, why we focus so much on it, and that's my personal opinion.
One thing we found when surveying students is that as we surveyed students like at the beginning of last semester and then at the end of the semester. And what we found is that the ones who started using AI more than before became more concerned about the ways that it might limit or inhibit their interaction with one another. And so in a way that speaks to what you were saying, like kind of this sad world where instead of talking to one another, we talk to AI. So won't that, affect like what many of you talked about, even in terms of what employers care about, the soft skills and so on? And what do we do about that?
I agree. We're laughing because we have a mutual friend. I won't air him out. I won't name names, but he did, in fact, get broken up with and then turn to AI throughout the course of that as his sort of therapist. And this drove a gulf, quite frankly, in our friendship, because I think he was just reluctant to speak to us. He became less willing to be vulnerable because he had this AI that he was vulnerable with, and he felt like he had no need to speak to us in this moment. And it was quite sad for me personally, and I can also definitely understand how an employer doesn't really want to network with someone who turns to ChatGPT every time they have a problem.
I would just jump in to say, I think in some ways the side of the story that the university might not realize is that at a student level, a stigma exists, and perhaps it's not big, but there is a stigma actually against using AI in assignments. So it's not just students like Emma who fly into rage when they find out that someone wrote an essay using ChatGPT, but in general, at an interpersonal level, what you'll find is that students are unwilling to admit publicly that they used AI to work on an assignment, because there's something almost it admits something about who you are, that you were not willing to sit with and wrestle with the assignment. So I think the good news is that if AI is going to take over the world, if AI is going to take over the function of the university, the students will be there to stand in its way. And the way in which they'll do that is by recognizing when their friends are turning too often to AI at the expense of using their minds and their hearts. The way in which they'll do that is by being willing to dialogue with universities about productive uses of AI within the classroom and so on.
Okay. Let me, oh, go ahead. Yes, Edgar.
I think what Muku's just said like really resonates with me. And contrary to what I said in the debate, I am also relatively anti-AI. Like I was singing its praises, but I personally have like never used it to submit any kind of assignment or anything like that. But I think that the important part that I want to spotlight is that when we're talking about like academic honesty and like students using AI in one way or another, I think there's a tendency to kind of paint like with a very broad brush in terms of students they want to take shortcuts, they want to get ahead. And obviously, all students want to achieve highly, and students will oftentimes take shortcuts to get ahead. And especially in institutions such as Columbia, and especially like when you talk to different kinds of students, students are willing to admit when some avenues are perhaps more or less let's say, legitimate than others. Mm-hmm. And there's gradations to this. There's students that will resort to ChatGPT when they're really lost and it's 3 a.m. and they really just don't have any hope. There's others that will turn to it off the bat because they think that it would genuinely be unintuitive and unintelligent to not use the tools that are available to you. And I think that there's very different beliefs and, as Muku said, very different narratives and stigmas within the student population. And oftentimes part of navigating an academic environment where ChatGPT is used to some degree is figuring out what circles you can surround yourself that would best uplift you, whether that's helping you use ChatGPT efficiently or students that will surround you and encourage you to use it as a supplement rather than a replacement to your work. There's many gradations and many beliefs on this in the student population.
So I've got just one more question for the panel. I want to ask Albert about this, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. But Albert, since you and Muku are on the side that argued that universities, have always adapted, and why would it change? One adaptation a lot of us are doing now is that we're banning screens in our seminars, right? To start with, seminars, but I can imagine it potentially going into other class, this kind of policy being used in other classes as well. What do you think about this idea that there's just too much of a downside in terms of screens in a seminar where, anecdotally you have a student ask, about free will, they'll ask ChatGPT, what do I think about free will? I mean, I'm not even kidding. Like this is one of a report I heard from a student. So what do you think about this idea? And then I'd be curious if, by show of hands, whether the panel might agree with banning screens in a seminar. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the role of technology has to be carefully moderated within classrooms. Mm-hmm. If the goal of the classroom and the discussion that you're having is for people to engage with the texts, to discuss with one another and what they actually think and not what ChatGPT thinks, I think there is a very strong case for saying, look, you can't be on your laptop while we're in discussion. And even in my CC, we're not really allowed to access the internet because he doesn't want us to be just asking ChatGPT what they think about the readings, but rather just to engage in that discussion ourselves. So I do think there's a strong case for especially limiting the use of technology within classrooms, but also if it's not feasible to limit the technology, perhaps to supervise its use.
Okay. What do the rest of you think? Just how many of you think that they should ban screens in seminars? Okay. But not you, Edgar, huh?
No, just because I think that this is actually up to the professor discretion. Mm-hmm. In my mind, the use of screens and to what extent you want to embrace ChatGPT is part of how a professor thinks their classroom should be run or how their class should be facilitated. I personally am in a CC section where the professor openly, not to say embraces using ChatGPT, but is quite resigned to the fact that some students are going to use it. And to that extent, she has adapted and made it so that one of our assignments, for example, is to have a productive discussion with ChatGPT and then to turn in the entire discussion, including what chat said and what we said. Mm-hmm. And that itself is what is graded. And I think that maybe that is not for everyone, and maybe to some students they think that's, goes against how they think CC should be taught. But students are able to self-select into one section or another based on if they think that professor aligns with how they think CC should be taught. So I don't think that a blanket ban would necessarily accomplish much. I think that if a professor feels strongly against it, then it's their prerogative to ban it within their own classroom. Mm-hmm. But it should be up to students and professors to select themselves into environments that they think best suit them.
Okay, great. So I think there's a microphone available and please do use the mic because we're recording, just so your questions can be heard. So I think the microphone is in the back. At least right now it is. Oh, no, here it is. There you go.
Oh, I have it here. Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful discussion. And I fully believe, I'm persuaded that no AI was used in the preparation of this debate. But I find myself wondering why not. And I think we've talked a lot about how AI could be a substitute or shortcut to thinking, but not a lot of thinking. We haven't talked a lot about how it can spur thinking more, and even debating is a very exotic. I've never was in a debate club, and it's really interesting to see the procedures, but I'm thinking, wouldn't AI make you a stronger debater? Wouldn't kind of putting up your thoughts against AI maybe intensify this debate? Yeah, just curious about your thoughts about that.
Maybe start with Emma, and then we'll come over to Albert. Go ahead.
Two things. The first is the style of debate. We do two styles of debate, but in both styles of debate, AI usage is not allowed. In many cases, computers are banned from tournaments. So we have a lot of practice generating arguments and responses without this. The second thing is that AI currently is quite bad at debate because it's particularly in kind of like fast-paced rounds, the way that arguments sort of interact with each other, it is not very good at replicating. So I think there's a point to that. We did do a practice round where we ran these arguments against each other, kind of developed and adjusted from there. But I think as AI currently stands, it's not as effective as doing human practice rounds. Maybe that will change, I don't know, but that's my perspective on it.
My perspective, I agree largely with what has been said, that even if your goal is like just having a good argument at the end of the day, that AI is ineffective at achieving it. But I also think there's just a second layer, which is that if you're outsourcing your thinking to AI, it means that you're less capable of doing that yourself. That is, we think it's important that you engage in the struggle of how do I respond to this argument? How am I going to write this argument? Because I think in terms of how you use AI, that will ultimately determine whether or not it is, as you say, more productive for your thinking versus it is opposed to your thinking. And I think in the majority of cases, it is, frankly speaking, more productive to just struggle with it, to sit there and actually struggle and force yourself to think, how does this happen? Because the more time that you spend struggling, the more time you spend engaging with how does debate work, how do arguments work, the better you will be able at doing that yourself.
Thank you. Another question. Here's one.
Thank you. This was great fun, really, and I expect to see at least a couple of you in law school sometime soon. I teach bioethics, and the most important lesson I convey to my students is intellectual humility. I'm curious to know what the four of you think will be the most difficult thing for AI to figure out how to teach students like you.
I think the thing that will be most difficult for AI to teach students, well, there are two parts to this answer. I think broadly speaking, the process of struggling and of thinking will be very difficult for AI to teach a student. Because in the instances where an AI is used by that student, it is often used to outsource the struggle and outsource his thinking. But in terms of a specific topic area that I think AI would struggle at instructing a student to replicate, I think it would be poetry. Because I think poetry is an avenue, is a topic area that is deeply personal, that is deeply human, and that even if AI can like string words together algorithmically, that because it does not contain with that element of like humanness, of individuality that makes poetry important, I think AI will struggle in implementing poetry. And I think, there have been some studies about whether or not AI is good at writing poetry, and I think there have been even jailbreaks of AI that incorporate the usage of poetry. So I think it would be poetry.
Yeah, Edgar.
I would say pattern recognition is very difficult for AI to teach because I'm speaking from, well, a lot of debate in the years that I've been training for it is about pattern recognition and recognizing when arguments are similar. Like oftentimes this right response to an argument can be broadly applied to lots of different arguments, and then it's about seeing like okay, but like what part of this argument is different? How do I need to adapt it? But the baseline is pattern recognition. And I think pattern recognition is something that only occurs with experience, right? Because it's something that you have to condition your brain towards like over and over again, oftentimes over a large period, like a long period of time. And if you think about the way in which you might use ChatGPT to study for a class, for example, it can feed you information and oftentimes very well, like you can internalize that information well. But it's not the same thing as if that information was fed to you once a day over the course of a year, for example. I think there's something about like the way it becomes familiar to you is very different. But also pattern recognition oftentimes are things that can't really be verbalized. Like ChatGPT ultimately has to deliver its information to you in the form of text that you read. Whereas pattern recognition oftentimes is more subconscious and it's recognizing themes that you can't really put your finger on, but that you know that if they say X, I have to do Y. And that's not just limited to debate. That's all sorts of things, like all sorts of jobs where over time you start to recognize broad patterns and we are able to respond faster and faster. So I think that's probably something that it will struggle to teach.
Can I offer a thought? I often say, and many of us do, the most valuable thing that we can teach is to teach students to teach themselves and to develop a lifelong love of learning, right? And so how do you do that? Like, one way to do that is just by example. So I've often thought, that it's kind of nuts that professors are not typically taught how to teach. We're just supposed to figure it out. And how do we do that? By example, right? We think of, our best teachers and how it is that they taught us. And many times it's because they inspired us. Like we saw how they loved their subject. And they often, would show us, what it's like when somebody just is boiling over with enthusiasm. And you want that feeling for yourself. And you want to know, where does that come from? And how do I, tap that, right, for the thing that inspires me. And I think that's one reason why we still have lecture courses. And in a way, it's like heresy, because the Center for Teaching and Learning, Amanda's going to correct me if I'm wrong, but for a long time, people have argued that the most effective way for students to learn, is to learn from one another. Active learning, the sage on the stage, it's an outmoded model, it's too passive, and so on. But still, I ask myself, well, why didn't Jesus know that? There are a lot of examples over thousands of years of people who we think of as very effective teachers who lectured to people, right? And so how does it work? I think maybe one way it works is when somebody is a very effective teacher, that when they're talking, whether it's a stage or Sermon on the Mount, they in some way are inspiring their audience. And maybe it's just not so much what they're saying, it's how they're saying it, right? And it cultivates a kind of feeling, among the people listening to them, where they want to know what that person knows. And if they want to know more, maybe, and they're going to want to know how to find out. So that's just like how I'm beginning to try to understand this. And that is something I think it's going to be hard for machines to replace. As long as humans typically look to other humans for models and for inspiration, I can't imagine like a robot doing that as effectively as a human can. What do you think, Muku?
What everyone has been saying so far seems to point to, and I hate to be the one to say this, but debate. Debate is something that AI will not take away. Columbia Debate Society has been working with a certain professor. She reached out to us for the first time last year, and she asked us if we could come and teach her class how to debate, because she wanted to integrate debate into her assignments. And in the process of doing that, I was the one who was responsible for delivering this sort of first lecture on debate. Something I had to think a lot about was, what is it about debate that, what is the difference between us standing here and speaking to you versus us writing essays and sending them out to you, versus writing emails? There's a joke that this could have been an email, but quite literally, this event could have been an email. But there's something special about debate, and it's something I've been learning very recently over the past few months. I've started coaching this group of incredible high school students from Ethiopia in debate. And I've been trying to think, what do I want them to learn? What do I want them to take away from this experience? And it's not the ability to string together some pretty words and maybe persuade or anything of the sort. It's heart. There's the central thing to debating, and the one thing AI will not take away from debate is heart. That the thing that makes a debater a persuasive speaker, the thing that makes Emma so persuasive, Albert so persuasive, Edgar so persuasive, is that they have heart, that they don't just stand there and say words to you, but they are speaking to your heart. They are reacting in real time to you. When you seem skeptical, they're adapting how they're speaking. When you seem confused, they're slowing down, so you're able to catch up with them. That ability to speak to someone's heart is not going away anytime soon, and is irreplaceable, but also unteachable. Heart is not something that you can hold a seminar in. It is something where you just watch a professor have heart and you think, wow, that's incredible. I want to be just like them.
There's a question here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the panel and debate. It's really inspiring, really motivates me to use less AI in my work. So I graduated years ago, and today I'm here to meet a professor, but I think in work I use AI a lot because I feel like work is really about efficiency sometimes. You have limited time and they expect you to do more and go above and beyond in a very short time. But I think you've mentioned about the stigma of using AI in your courses, like, and also the effects it might have on your thinking. I just wonder, could each one of you share one helpful AI use cases, one helpful AI use case that's meaningful in your life or work study?
So who's used AI in a way that you actually found maybe not just helpful, right? But what about surprising? Like, have you been surprised? And yeah, Albert and then Edgar.
I guess. So I find the most common ways that I use AI is to provide feedback. Maybe feedback on an essay that I'm not terribly confident in, maybe feedback on a discussion post where I want to make sure I'm not misquoting what somebody said. And so it's just a very convenient gut check. Like, am I going crazy or is this actually correct? So that's the most common way that I use AI. And the most helpful way that I've found with using AI is just, it does have some ability to do research. You obviously have to be worried about, is this hallucinating? So you kind of have to double check its work, but it's double checking your work, which is kind of funny. But sometimes when you're doing research and you're like, okay, do my arguments make sense? Are they related to what's existing out there? It can be helpful to brainstorm a bit, to get the feedback, and then engage with the AI.
I was going to say very similarly, the majority use case that I used AI for last semester, I want to say, is actually interview prep. AI actually, I did not know this, but AI has this ability where you can voice record into it, and it can transcribe what you're saying with remarkable accuracy, and then it can actually speak back to you in a voice which also sounds remarkably human, which is very good at, I guess, emulating what an interview might sound like. And I think this is an instance where AI is not necessarily better than a human giving you a mock interview, for example. But the fact that AI is always available to you 24/7, and it's something that I could use in my dorm room whenever I wanted, rather than having to hop on a Zoom call and ask one of my upperclassmen to mock interview me. The availability of it was its advantage. Even if the actual mock interview quality might not have been the best, I think that a lot of practice is just about having repeated exposure and saying your words out loud and realizing that I actually don't know how to say this, or how to verbalize it very well. Especially because I was also doing some interviews in Chinese, for example, and then AI is able to repeat back to me those questions without me having to find a native Chinese speaker who can also conduct interviews with me. So that was quite excellent.
So unless there's any other questions, I just want to ask one more question of the panel. One of you said, I can't remember who, but said, we're using AI maybe more than you realize. And we're trying to find out, believe me. We are doing a lot of research with our students to find out what they're thinking about AI, how they're using it, and so on. And not just research, we're doing more than that, trying to see what works. But if there's one thing, maybe each of you could take a turn. One thing you think people don't understand about how students are thinking about and using or not using AI, in Emma's case, what is that thing that we need to know and that we haven't figured out yet?
Yeah, I guess I want to first say that when I said students are using AI more than professors realize, I think that's more of a reflection of my, I guess, surprise, because when I first arrived to study here is when I faced the biggest shock in terms of how many people were using AI. where I attended high school, ChatGPT was certainly a thing, but I don't think anyone seriously or like contemplated using it for homework assignments. Whereas I found here there was much more likely to be a very cavalier attitude towards using it. Just in the sense that when I first heard my friend being like just use chat, just use chat, which is short for ChatGPT, that was just quite a shock to me. And I think it was more to do with finding out that there are like circles of people that don't really think it's such a big deal to use ChatGPT. In regards to your question specifically, I think that professors need to understand that students are not necessarily using ChatGPT because they want to or because they're lazy. I think for a lot of them, it is to do with the fact that there's also increasing burdens on students to balance so many different things at once. I wasn't lying when I was talking about the struggle for employability. That's like, there's so much mounting pressure and you feel like you're only human and you're not adapting and growing at the pace that these different tasks are required of you. So if you have this tool which can at least alleviate one of these pressures, then surely you would use it.
Edgar actually touched on / stole what I was going to say, which is, I mean, perhaps this is naive, but I have quite a lot of faith in the student body, and I think that the vast majority, if not all of us, people would not be using AI if they weren't intensely incentivized and pressured to do so. Obviously, some of us are more Luddites than others and have greater capacity to dig their heels in the mud and say, I'm not going to do it. But I am not naive enough to think that at some point I will be in a job or whatever that will require me to use AI, or I will reach some breaking point. And I think the very difficult thing is that as professors react to AI, part of that is by sort of increasing the demand and shifting the Overton window, saying, okay, we're going to assume that students are using X amount of AI to complete this assignment, so I'm going to make the assignment X amount harder to counteract for that. It really, I mean, again, this is from my perspective, I think it is very difficult for the students who aren't using it to catch up. And so I think there are many people who do, like myself, have a principled objection to it that are finding themselves because of this Overton window shifting. So if I had to package that into something, I would be saying, don't overly homogenize the student body. Don't assume that everyone wants to do this. Give them a chance to not use it in a way that doesn't pressure them to, and I think that a lot of them won't, given their circumstances. Oh, sorry.
I can do 30 seconds. So I think the biggest takeaway I've had about AI over the last few months is that even when students do use AI, they use it quite selectively. It's more likely that you'll see a student using AI to generate a discussion post than to see them using AI to generate a 25-page research paper. And I think that says a lot about the structure of the classroom, and it says a lot about how urgent students feel certain aspects of their learning experience are. So I think the short answer would be, I love all my instructors, and I adore the fact that sometimes they decide to set discussion posts.
We love you too, man.
But I definitely think there is some rethinking to be done around those aspects of the classroom that students feel are so throwaway that they can be outsourced to AI.
Okay, how about you, Albert? And you're going to have the last word.
Oh, wow, that's a lot. I think there are like two layers. I think the first is like what students want out of college and then what they're willing to get out of it. If you go to college and you're like, I just want a grade, I just want a job, I think that type of student is probably more likely to use AI because they care less about the process. I think the second is just that even if you yourself, and I think the second is just like, in terms of what grades have been used for to like access the job market, like even if you think to yourself, I don't really want to use AI, your grades are still being used to evaluate you relative to your peers. So even if you don't want to, and they are, there's an increased pressure on you to do so, to get a job, to be able to survive later. So I think, overall, we need to be very conscious of the pressures we are putting on students, what it incentivizes them to do with AI.
Great. Thank you so much, Albert. And thank you, everyone. And please join me in thanking our panelists.
That concludes our day. Please, can we just do one more round of applause for the Columbia Debate Society? I will come to every debate. Every time you do this, I will come. This is my favorite show that I am watching right now. Thank you so much, and thank you to, on behalf of the Columbia Data Science Institute, the Center for Teaching and Learning, the Columbia Alliance Program, Columbia, did I already say Columbia Engineering? Teachers College. It's been a very long day. We are so grateful that you have joined us in a conversation, human brains, human intellect, thinking through what it means to reimagine teaching and learning in the age of AI. It's been a fantastic day of discussions with students, with faculty, with international colleagues, and demo expos in the Low Rotunda. We are very grateful for your participation, your engagement, and mostly for pushing up against hard problems that don't have easy answers. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a lovely evening.